So I wanted to share the Summoner Necromancer build that I've been using to push through Nightmare Dungeons in World Tier 4. It's very easy to play and mostly uses two skills. No complicated setup required like the Bone Spirit build. Also, it uses full Summoner. I don't use any curse skill or vulnerable stats or skills as well. And at my current level, I can farm tier 35 to 45 very, very easy. Anything lower than that is a cakewalk. And around tier 46 to 50 is where things could be more difficult. Let's start with the equipment. For the helmet, I'm using the aspect of disobedience. This is a defensive aspect wherein your armor rating increases whenever you deal any form of damage. And since this build uses damage over time, we can get the numbers up real fast. For the chest piece, I'm using the aspect to increase the number of the skeletal mages here. And this is the ideal stats that I'm looking for the defensive equipment. So we have increase to maximum life, increase to maximum minion life, stat point increases, and another type of defensive stats like damage reduction. For the gloves, this is going to be the first required unique item for this build. I'm using the Howl from Beyond, and the legendary aspect for this item turns our corpse explosion into a skeleton that seeks out enemies first before exploding. And that is very important to the build. This item also gives increase to lucky hit chance, which is very good since we'll be stacking lucky hit chance as well. Aside from that, the gloves also provide lucky hit for more crowd control, such as stun and fear. Now, for the pants, we are looking for the same defensive stats. However, you need to make room for the plus ranks in Corpse Explosion. I'm using the very basic aspect of Protector for more survivability. Alternatively, you can also use the aspect of Hardened Bones. That's the aspect where the it increases the damage reduction for the minions if you have seven or more minions on the field. Now for the boots, same defensive stat, but we need to have the increase to evade charges and movement speed. Also, this is the where I use the aspect to increase the skeletal warriors. Now for the weapon, this is the second and last required unique item. This item, Black River, can consume up to four corpses at once when using the corpse explosion. It increases the damage and rages of the corpse explosion per corpse consumed. So more corpse consumed equals more damage, more essence generated through our passives, and for less clicks. Now for the amulet, I use the Edge Master aspect for this one as it increases the damage. If I have full essence, and more than half of the time, we always have max essence. Also, look for offensive bonuses like damage over time, shadow damage, or just flat damage overall. For the rings, I'm looking for increase in lucky hit chance, maximum minion life, maximum increase in your HP, and also an offensive bonus such as damage over time or shadow damage. This is also where I use the blighted aspect to increase my damage to 100% or more. If you have a good roll, once the stacks of the shadow blight reaches 10, which is very easy to achieve on this build. For the other ring, I'm using the inner calm aspect for more damage increase per second that we are standing still. So with this build, you are holding your position quite a lot during combat, so that's a very big plus for the damage as well. Also, I'm planning to move the blighted aspect over to the amulet, just to try and test if we could get more DPS if the blighted aspect is on the amulet and the Edge Master is on the Underwing. Lastly, for the offhand, I'm using Focus for more DPS and look for bonuses like more minion life, your own HP, and maybe combination of defense or offensive stats. This is also where I put the last Shadow Blight aspect. to increase basically more Shadow Blight damage once you have your DOTs rolling in. Now for the gems, I'm using skulls on the accessories, damage over time on both the weapon and offhand, and I'm kind of using the HP gems for now, but previously I was using the 45 gems, so I'm still kind of testing, but both could work on this build. So that's for the equipment. Moving on to the skill tree, so we only need like 2 points here, so we can move to our core skills. So at the core, we'll be getting the Blight, this 1 point, and just pick up the enhancement for Blight so that we can add slow and a chance to immobilize enemies whenever we hit with Blight. So this is going to be our opener. And as you can see, our lucky hit chance is up to 52%. So that's like half the time we'll have a chance to trigger our lucky hits. So we can start generating corpses and adding crowd control to the enemies. Also need to have like max hued flesh for the corpse generation. Moving on to the next line, we only need like 1 point for blood mist. This is our escape skill. Max points for corpse explosion, since this is going to be our main damaging skill. Pick up the enhancement. Make sure that we convert our corpse explosion to shadow damage. We also need to max all our minion passive skills for more damage and survivability. Also need to max out Grim Harvest for essence generation and Fueled by Death for damage bonuses when we consume corpses. So since we'll be generating a lot of corpses via lucky hit chance, and then we consume corpses um, fast via our weapon, the Black River, so we'll be generating and adding more damage quite fast. Moving on to the next one, we will need a max points for Death's Reach. This is going to increase our damage to distant enemies, and this build is actually a range build, and we always try to position ourselves or put a distance between enemies and ourselves. In cases that enemies get up front or close, we will need max points on Death's Embrace. This will give us more damage to nearby enemies, and they will also deal less damage to us, so that's another point of damage mitigation. Again, max points for minion passives. Moving on to this line, we will need to have max points on Necrotic Carapace. This is our Fortify generating skill. So whenever a corpse is formed, it gives us Fortify, so that's why we need a lot of ways to generate corpses. On the left side, we just need to like put 1 point on Reaper's Pursuit just to open up these skills or passives. So for Crippling Darkness, we'll need to have like max points. So we can have like 15% chance to stun enemies for 3 seconds. And 3 seconds is actually a lot of time. Terror as well, we need to max this out. Since we have a way to put slow, stun, and immobilize our enemies via our passives and skills. So this gives us more bonus damage. Also for Gloom, since we deal darkness skills, this would increase our shadow damage as well, and this is also stacks up to 3 times. Moving on to this line, we need to max our Golem Mastery, and our ultimate skill is going to be the Army of the Dead. Make sure to get the enhancement, especially the Supreme Army of the Dead, since from my experience, I rarely use the race skeleton, and I just use Army of the Dead for burst DPS and to basically replenish the numbers of the minions. For this one, we only need to like put 1 point in Inspiring Leaders to open up the skill. This is where we need to max Death's defense, make sure that our minions survive one-shot skills of the enemies. So basically, we just need to prioritize the survival of our minions. Lastly, we'll be getting the Shadow Blight. Now, Shadow Blight or shadow damage that we deal to our enemies infects them with Shadow Blight. So this just adds bonus damages to enemies affected by our DOTs. So that's for our skill tree. Moving on to the Paragon board, and for the starting board, I'm using the control glyph. This adds bonus damage to crowd control enemies, and again, since this build deals a lot of crowd control via our skill, passives, and minions, and all of the listed crowd control on the bonus, on the additional bonus, we all have that. So we deal more damage by using this glyph. Now for the second board, I'm using the Flesh Eater board, basically to increase or grant 40% increased damage once we consume 5 corpses. And since we are using again the Black River and it can consume 4 corpse in 1 click, so basically we just need 5 corpse, like 2 clicks, so that to trigger this passive. So almost all of the time, this one is up whenever we are in combat. Also, for the second board, I'm using the Scourge glyph. This adds shadow damage over time. So that's very basic for our skills. Moving on to the third board, and I'm using Wither. So this adds bonus damage to our shadow damage and shadow damage over time. But more importantly, for this board, we'll be getting a lot of nodes that increase shadow damage and shadow over time damage as well. So try to get all of the nodes here for more damage. And for the glyph, I'm using darkness, so basically gives more shadow damage, and that covers shadow damage and shadow damage over time. Now for our last board, I'm using the cult leader. This is to increase the survivability and damage for our minions, but I'm actually focusing on minion survivability first. That is why I didn't go ahead and went for the aspect or the legendary node for this board. Instead, I went ahead and get the minion passive for damage reduction. Also to activate the glyph, which is Dead Racer, which basically improves or give additional bonuses for nodes that give damage reduction and damage for your minions. So if you look at the node, I have 39% damage reduction and additional damage for my minions here. But again, we are only focusing on the damage reduction. So 39% for this node, and then if you add the glyph, that's another 30% damage reduction for the minion. So that is a lot of damage reduction for the minion. Again, we need the minions to stay on the board so we can utilize them for their utility. So that's it for the Paragon board. Moving on to the Book of the Dead, for the Skeleton Warriors, I'm using the Reapers, basically to generate more corpses. For the Skeletal Mage, I'm using the Cold Skeletal Mage that would add chill and freeze enemies for more crowd control and also to generate more essence. And for the Golems, I'm using the Bone Golem, basically to generate corpses and also another point of crowd control via taunt. So that's for our Book of the Dead. So let me just show you a bit of a gameplay here. Okay, so our opener is going to be the Blight. Just hold right click. Once we dump our essence, you just hold left click. And if you can see, the essence actually just jumped back to max. And we are now engaging enemies off screen. So like what I mentioned on the build guide, we're just holding up to our position. And now I'm just actually holding left click. The minions are now engaging the enemies, And the corpse explosions just seeking targets off screen. So we move once it's cleared, as you can see. So we dump the essence, right click, and then once we have normal essence, generated corpse, left click, and again, essence went back to 100. So we're not using crit damage, we're not using vulnerable, we're just generating corpse and just dealing damage by corpse explosion. So dump again, right click, hold left click, and as you can see, armor is just going up. We now again triggered our max damage, bonus damage. So we're holding on to 34k. Yeah, very easy to play. So that's the gameplay. So if you guys like what you have seen with the gameplay, and if you have questions or suggestions, just put them down in the comment. And if you like the build, please share or like this video. I'll be improving this build more, and also the goal is to finish the highest rank for the Nightmare Dungeons using this build. So thank you guys for watching, and see you on the next one.